And just so it can be available later for anyone who wants to rewatch. Okay, so today we're going to have a part 2 of talking about 1-point perspective. I got a lot of questions from the last class, so I thought actually that this could be a more informal and less structured class where people can ask questions. I can do my answer that we can draw a little bit, look at diagrams, and do our best to sort of hone in on how this works and what it is exactly. So I guess I just open it up to questions first. If anybody was left really confused or just has a specific question, even more general question, I'm more than happy to just start off with questions. You can unmute and start your video if you'd like to, or you can just unmute yourself.
Callie, I have a question on the perspective when you have like a distant point. Like I think I'd seen somewhere you have a perspective like down in Arbor or something, and there might be a sidewalk. And I know images like in the squares of a sidewalk, for example, as they go away from you, they get smaller. But is there a kind of rule of thumb for the diminishing size? Same thing for trees. I know you can kind of put their tops along an angle going down and going up, but is there like a general way of knowing how large or small the first one in that line is, and how in proportion to each other they might grow or shrink, if that's the right word to use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there isn't like a rule of thumb, but yes, things do diminish in size, and like the space between things, right, gets smaller the further away you go. Let's see, I actually have a picture here that I can show you that I was going to use today that shows this perfectly. Sorry, hello?
Oh, you're back.
You're back.
Okay.
You're back.
Sorry, guys, I don't know what happened. It just cut out right and then came back on. Okay. Yes, a little hiccup. Okay, so as we were saying, like this could be a really good example. Now, one thing you can do is you can measure. For example, you see how you have these like diamonds or squares on the floor. You could see like how tall is this compared to, as you can compare one to the other as they go back in space. You can also just think about if you drew a horizontal line, right? The space between those gets smaller and smaller as you go back in space. But the one thing that you definitely will help is, let's see, is if you drew lines. I didn't draw them on the floor, but if you actually drew the lines in, that will help you start to see better, like if there were trees or squares on a sidewalk or something like this. Putting in these actual lines that converge, that's a good way to start. And then you can think about, you could mark them off horizontally as you go back. One thing to think about is, like in this case, they're taller here, as in the height of this square is taller than this, right? And that's because they're sort of getting flattened. You can think about it as they go back in space. Does that answer your question at all? There isn't an exact rule. It's sort of an observational thing that also you can measure as you go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's something like, I didn't take a picture of this, but something that's really good to work with that are like arches, and looking at the space and how it gets smaller between the arches as you go excuse me, in the distance. But one thing to do is to measure those. And then you can kind of see, it gets hard to see as you go back in space. Okay, anyone else want to comment, question, make a question, ask a question?
That was helpful. Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, good. You're welcome.
Karen's there.
Okay. So I had several questions about, I want to just maybe go over again the anatomy of 1-point perspective. That way we can sort of clarify in our minds and compare it with what we call 2-point perspective, which is actually more common, but not necessarily. So maybe that can clarify a little bit as to what they are, 1 and 2 point, and how they work and what they look like exactly. So let me just share again. So this is the hallway here in my studio, and it's actually a perfect example of 1-point perspective. So all that means is I'm looking head on, and all of the lines are converging here to 1 point. And this point is actually where I'm looking, right? I'm standing in the middle of the hallway looking down it, and this is, right, where my eye is focused. So that's why, so if I were standing a little bit to the right, this point would be a little bit over here, or vice versa. If I were standing here on the left, this point, all the lines would be converging at a different point. But since I'm standing right in the middle, all the lines are converging to this 1 point. And this red line represents the horizon line, which is just really my eye line. So just to clarify, this is what we call 2-point perspective. And it can be a little bit misleading by the name 2 points, because here it says you have 2 points. But the thing is, the horizon line, or my eye line, is always the same. The points are vanishing, right? All the lines are converging, but to 2 separate points on the same horizon line or at my eye level. So buildings, where you see 2 sides of a building, this happens a lot. And so that's a really good example, and I hope pretty clear. Now, I mean, just this little, the building here, it's also vanishing to this point here. So this is the difference between 2-point perspective and 1-point perspective. 1-point perspective is actually great. Like in Italy, it's great for drawing buildings, churches, all kinds of things that really quite often are in 1-point perspective. Here's another example of a little watercolor I did in Morocco that also all the points are converging here. Right. So you can see I wasn't standing, I was sitting on a stool, right? So my eye line is pretty low, which is why these top lines are a little bit exaggerated, right? They're really steeply sloped. Okay. Questions? Comments? Anything at all?
Again, so on the 2 point, you're really saying that, I didn't hear this the last time, it's the first time I heard it, was that both vanishing points are actually on the same horizon. That's
yeah. So, right. So, and the reason why I think why it can be misleading is because really you could have more than 2 vanishing points, but they're always going to be on the same horizon. They're always at your eye line, but it's in 2 different places. And a lot of times those points are maybe, you're drawing on a little piece of paper. those points may be like way off the edges, but they're still always at your eye line. So the thing about this is when you start to draw, you're not able to necessarily figure out where is that dot that they're all converging to and make your drawing based on that. Instead, the good thing, or the easier way, or sort of the more realistic way to make a drawing is to start by using your pencil, or start by sketching in these lines here, and that they're all sort of, the lines that are an angle. Because once you can kind of sketch these in, you're going to see that they're pointing all to the same spot, right? And as you sort of sketch these in and move them around and figure it out, it's like they're all leading you to a spot. Somebody is saying, Connie says, when I teach elementary school students, it's difficult to get the idea with perspective. You also have to use angles, draw using angles, not right angles. So buildings look like warp boxes, not regular boxes. Yeah, so buildings can be, they're good because they're, straight lines, except in Italy, they're not always straight. But so you can find the angles, like right where the bottom of the building is or the top of the building. And now if something generally is above your eye line, right, like see the curtains here behind me, as they meet the ceiling, it's pointing down because it's above my eye and it's coming down to meet my eye. Or if it's on the ground, it's going to be pointing up, coming to meet my eye. And, you can just check your angles by using your pencil like the hand of a clock. So why don't we try, I'll put up this drawing, this photograph again of the hallway that has the, the checkered squares in the middle. And why don't we try to make a drawing, our own drawing of it. Now, instead of trying to find the point that all the lines vanish to from the beginning, what we'll do is, like Connie said, find the angles of the floor, of the walls, where the walls meet the ceiling. Let's find those angles first. And then when those all meet, put in the vanishing point. Now, one thing here is, sorry, I'm going to share my screen, is there is this sort of doorway here, which makes a square, right? So which blocks this part here. So these are nice verticals though, right? So one thing is we want to start by sort of sketching in these lines, right? These lines, here's the door, here's where the wall meets the ceiling. And then we can put in the vertical lines of where is this. And then the horizontal line of where is the floor. You can also, if you're an ambitious person, put in, right, start to put in the lines of these squares on the floor. And if you're super ambitious, you can start drawing in these squares. Okay, so I thought maybe we can take about, I don't know, maybe even up to 10 minutes to try and draw this on our own, and then we'll come back together and we can share our drawings, insights that you had that can really help other people, and also just questions. So, does anybody want to say anything or any questions before we start?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to mute everyone. If anyone, you can just unmute. Okay, so we're going to take 10 minutes and make our own drawing from this photograph and see how we do with the perspective. I'm going to share my screen, so I'm not able to see the chat box. So if anyone has any questions, just please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Okay, so let's take 10 minutes and interrupt at any time. Otherwise, we'll start now. Okay, just 1 minute left. Okay, and let's stop. Okay, so what happened? Let's hear. Is it good? Is it hard? Was it easy? Sorry, I'm just like finishing mine up. My hands rubbed all over it. Okay. Let's see, I can show you my drawing that I did if you can see at all. I just put in some of the squares. Now, the point is, like, I didn't use a ruler. This is not perfect, right? Like, it's still a drawing drawn by hand. And I'm not an architect, so I'm not making an architectural rendering. I'm sort of just interested in exploring the lines and the space in the drawing, right? It just has to be believable. It doesn't have to be perfect. So does anybody want to share what happened or your drawing or, you know, how it went? Excuse me.
I guess that shows how hard it is, huh?
Okay,
No
so
one's feeling proud.
yeah, that's okay because it's challenging. And what I should probably do is make a little video that's sort of step by step because it's a little bit hard to otherwise it just becomes you could get lost, not be sure where to start, or you know, just get confused in all the lines. If anybody has any questions, I can answer them. But if you say that it's hard, that's good, right? So it helps if you can say or pinpoint and specify what is hard exactly or what you had trouble with. Okay, well, honestly, this time is just for you, and I don't have any more like structured, like drawing exercises. Today was just a little bit more informal to explore and ask questions.
I
Okay,
can share, but I'm
everyone...
over to this side. Oh, sorry.
Okay, yeah, can you come a little bit closer?
The windows drive me crazy.
Okay, great. So
It's all kind of,
that looks really
you know,
good.
that's kind of crooked, everything. Anyway.
Yeah, so it can help to leave the construction lines, like put the lines of, right, like draw in the lines of, like I left mine here, like the lines of where they're going down to meet the point. Because often, sometimes, or a lot of times, these lines that are above can be a lot more, a lot steeper than we think they are. Yeah, but
Yeah.
the windows are crazy because they also have grids on them.
Yeah.
I don't like the squares on the floor. Yeah, it makes me appreciate MC Escher's drawings now more than ever.
And Kelly, I found when I was, I'm sorry, I found when I was doing the vanishing point that they didn't actually converge at first. So when I did the, like the top of these two things, it was
Yeah.
like, one went like down here and one like it came down here or something. So it made me, I mean, the good news is it made me look at it again and maybe I was off because I was using your clock thing, you know, it was always like 45-degree angle, whatever it was, that kind of stuff. And so I was focusing on the lines, but I felt like I really struggled, I guess, with positioning the things to each other once I did that. So I mean, I'm not displeased with it because it's more in perspective than it would have been.
Yeah.
For sure.
Great. Yeah, I think so. The perspective of this drawing looks like you're really tall, like you're almost as tall as the ceiling, right? Either it's a really short ceiling or you're a very tall woman.
Mm-hmm.
And why I say that is because let me show you the, so let's just look at so these lines here, they're probably more slanted, right? Like going up more than you think, right? So so your floor looks great. Like these are pointing here. Now, if you put in this vertical, like this line, you decide, okay, it looks about that tall, right? It can be, right, it's shorter than this here, right? This is that tall, and down here it's this tall. So it doesn't have to be exact. But if you decide the height, what you can do is you can then, and you find where this floor, your floor line looks pretty good. So if you draw it through, and if you have this one, and your floor kind of, they come to the same point, and then you have this vertical, from here, you can make the line from the center. So even if you just have, say, the floor, the two lines are meeting here at one point, then you can find the ceiling lines or those crazy window lines, right? So one cool thing about this doorway here, this sort of triangular thing, is if this is our center, which it is, this is actually an X, meaning the line is going to go through here and follow up. So it lines up with the corners here. These corners here meet here. So this is like a giant X, which I should have drawn in the diagram and did not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Kelly, what I did is I drew the frame fatter than the picture. And so when I was doing my angles, my angle was like off to the right. So that's one reason I wasn't getting a vanishing point, but I see that the angle was more like a 1 o'clock rather than a 2 o'clock now that you say that. So it's interesting to say that just that makes me look, yeah, like I'm kind of looking off a balcony into or something.
Yeah, like you're almost as tall as the ceiling.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, so it's really good, right? So sometimes we can't see when something's off until it's off, which is totally fine, and that's how drawing works, right? And then you can go back and correct it from there. Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. That really helps, Marcia.
Can I share mine?
Yeah. Hi, Connie.
Hi. So
Great. Yes.
I think my ceiling needs to be a little more
Nice.
steep because I would be taller, kind of like Marcia a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Maybe just a little bit taller. Yeah. Right. Or just the lines are slightly steeper.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And how does your but you've got the vanishing point right because it's right there in the middle, that black box square that's
Yeah.
framed by the door.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, and so you teach perspective to elementary students.
I try to, but it's really hard because they understand that a square has right angles everywhere. I mean, if you show them a cube, they understand that there's straight lines and right angles, not angles like this, but like this. But when you draw it, it's got to be more angles like this or like this, you know, depending on your perspective. And it's hard for them to translate what they know about cubes to draw a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional surface. Just the translation is very difficult for them. And I try and teach them, trust the lines that you're drawing. Don't trust what you know about cubes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, and it's, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's just a tricky concept. And even, you know, me drawing this, I think, okay, yeah, I know the angles have to come down, but I should have measured a little more and made those top angles steeper. But in my mind, I'm thinking, but when we build a building, we don't build a building like this. We build a building like this, you know?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so it just depends where you look at the building from. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, drawing is different. Perceiving on a two-dimensional plane is so different than what we understand about the real world. So
Yeah, spatially. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and it's constructed, like, don't exactly see that way, right? It's like as if we had one eye, which we don't. So in a way, it isn't exactly what we see either, but it's close.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's really great. Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful.
Sure.
Okay. Does anyone else want to share or comment or ask a question?
Kelly, can we put up the 2-point perspective drawing and maybe try to draw that one? Just to copy it?
Absolutely. So let me make this a little bit bigger. So the one thing is it's hard to see that they didn't highlight, you know, the vanishing points are all on a horizon, the same horizon line. So it helps if you can draw a straight line in between these two. And so then anything that's going towards the right, from left to right, is going to meet this here. And anything that's going from the right to the left, that makes sense, goes here. Yeah, so I'll just leave this here. So does anyone have questions about this diagram, about 2-point perspective? We haven't talked about it. And maybe we won't talk about it for a little while. We'll do some other things in the meantime. So, how about, well, Karen, why don't you tell me when?
I actually find 2-point perspective almost easier than 1-point perspective.
Okay, that's interesting. Why is that? It just seems to make
don't
more
know.
sense.
Yeah, it makes more sense with the lines, the way they work together. So yeah, that's good. I mean, I just thought it was like a good thing to just try one, because I haven't done 2-point perspective in ages, so it was fun.
Kelly,
Yes.
one thing I've noticed in life is that for tall buildings, if you're looking from your vision point, looking up to tall buildings, they expand away and seem to get larger as they go up.
Okay, well, that's the third point in perspective.
Yeah. Let's not get
um,
ahead of ourselves.
I know that complicates things, but it's just something I've noticed. That's all.
Yeah, well, actually, they normally tend to get smaller, like they go to a point, but it can kind of depend, like if you're standing really close to them, like in Manhattan or something, standing under a skyscraper. But it's actually a really great tool that you can use for drawing to make things seem tall and kind of exaggerate the thing of feeling tall is when it's really wide at the bottom and then goes, you know, and gets really fine as it goes up. And, that's a good way to exaggerate the sense or communicate the sense of something being really tall. But maybe if you send me a picture of what you mean, if you find something, that would really help. Seeing as it's all visual stuff. Yeah, I'm like, it's hard to picture.
Oh, I think we're still on. Okay. That's probably good enough.
Okay, is anybody still drawing from this? You want me to leave it for a few more minutes? Yes, no.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Tell me how it's going.
Well, one, I think this is easier just because it's so simple for
Yeah.
one, and they're all very like, straight lines and
Yes.
sort of thing. So that it's a little, I think it's a little bit easier just to execute.
Yeah. Well, and really, even when things get more complicated, you can even simplify them like this. Like in Italy, we have a lot of, for example, double vaulted ceilings in colonnades, right? Or arcades. So, columns arches and then vaults going in two directions. Even though when things look complicated, this is really helpful. If you keep something like this in your mind, even the most complicated, what seem to be the most complicated situations or settings can really usually be pretty simplified. I mean, one thing that's more based in reality, like now if you go and draw a room in your house with tables, chairs, checker linoleum floors, windows, countertops, stove, right? These are all things that are in perspective, and they won't always have the same vanishing points, right? Like not everything is lined up in a row. But they will be vanishing to your eye line, right? So this is a good exercise. So you just have to find where. Now, one thing that's really good to keep in mind is that these lines are parallel to each other, right? They run parallel to each other. And unless something is totally crazy wonky, it's like the bottom and the top of the object, they're going to be running parallel, meaning, right, they have to meet at a point, the same point. Even if this object were in a different turn slightly, it might meet at a different point. But these two, the top and the bottom lines, are parallel to each other. Okay. Do you need more time with this image, or are people done drawing it?
So Kelly, I hadn't noticed before either, because it looked like I was trying to do the buildings, like the space between the buildings, and the line is in there. So I was getting that incorrect, but I think you had said it, but I just hadn't thought to apply it, which was that like the building, the back building on the right, that line is actually, that the side. Here. Yeah. And until I did that, I didn't get that angle right.
Right. Yeah. So, right. These two are parallel, and it's very lightly drawn in here. And then the opposite is true with this building here. These are going to meet over on the right.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
It sounds like it's starting to make sense.
It might be.
Yeah. It's not that hard. It's just, putting it into practice when things look really complicated, right? Trying to simplify. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. So does anybody want to share their drawings, comments, ask questions? Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording now. So thanks very much.